Okay, this week we are going to talk about the doing of anthropology. And I want to start by talking about ethnocentrism and relativism. So, what we need to consider is that there are so many different versions of what the world is like. So we need to think about how do we go about trying to understand each of them without making positive or negative judgments. Which version is correct? Are there any that we can reject or condemn? Can we say, as many have, that one culture is superior to another? With as many human behaviors and beliefs as there are in the world, it's not difficult to find practices that may seem bizarre or shocking, even to trained anthropologists. If we do condemn the beliefs and behaviors of others, we may be committing the ethnocentric fallacy. And this is the idea that our beliefs and behaviors are right and true, while those of other people are wrong and misguided. This is also called ethnocentrism, and cultural anthropologists have long fought against this. Cultural anthropology tries to show that what may appear to be an odd belief or bizarre bit of behavior is functional and logical in the context of a particular culture. If everyone thinks they are right and others must be wrong, we can only reach an intellectual dead end. Also, if we assume that we have all the right answers, then our study of cultures becomes the study of other people's mistakes. But ethnocentrism is a cultural universal. People evaluate and judge other people and cultures through the lens of their own values and traditions all the time. There is an alternative to ethnocentrism called relativism. No behavior or belief is judged to be wrong simply because it is different from our own. This suggests that we must try to understand culture in its own terms and to understand the beliefs or behaviors for the purpose, function, or meaning that they have to the people in the societies in which we find them. Yes, in essence, relativism suggests that a specific behavior or belief can only be understood in relation to the culture in which it is embedded. So, for example, in the Sudan, genital mutilation of females makes perfect sense because family honor is determined in part by the sexual modesty of a female. Therefore, the operation protects the honor of the family and the girl and protects the girl from sexual assault. The practice also serves as population control. But relativism puts us in a moral predicament. This quickly leads to the relativistic fallacy, or the idea that it's impossible to make moral judgments about the beliefs and behaviors of others. This implies that there can be no belief or behavior that can held to be wrong. And that's a problem as well. Relativism does not mean that we don't condemn certain acts. It means that when we are studying a culture, we attempt to understand certain behaviors with regard to that culture. So this leads us to doing cultural anthropology. Ethnocentrism and relativism are two of the biggest problems anthropologists must face before even going into the field, although these issues do plague them as they are studying cultures unlike their own. What I want to do is walk you through the process of doing cultural anthropology, and as we consider the methods, we're going to consider some of the problems faced. So let's start with the fact that anthropology considers itself a science for the most part. And the issue of science can be problematic for cultural anthropologists who study people. Studying people from a scientific perspective can be difficult because of the behavior of human beings. They can be so unpredictable. But our goals as anthropologists actually require us to be able to predict some behavior to some extent and be able to explain it. So how do we go about doing this? So really, we follow the scientific method that guides the research. And I'm going to take you through this process as it applies to cultural anthropology and discuss each of these steps in some detail. So the research process begins with interest, and this is how you're going to start your process with your paper. First, what area of the world are you interested in? Remember, cultural anthropology can be done everywhere people are. It can be done in your own backyard. It can be done in an exotic country. For many, this choice is based on a previous visit or someone relating an interesting experience. Second, what group in your region interests you? On many large continents or in many large countries, there are groups living in small areas. Who do you want to study? And then finally, what are you interested in knowing? These days, it's hard to know everything about a society, but when you're an anthropologist, you try to get as much information as you can. So you have to be a little more focused. Are you interested in marriage patterns, aging processes, religion, art? There are all kinds of questions being asked by anthropologists. An anthropologist often formulates the final interest by spending some time in the field prior to their actual field work. Second, formulate a research question and a hypothesis. A research question might be something like, how does the practice of female circumcision affect a society? A hypothesis might read, female circumcision functions to maintain a marriage system based on honor and chastity. Some people would argue that a hypothesis is a difficult thing to take into the field because they argue that it biases the collection of data. So some anthropologists really just go into a field with a research question and they sort of formulate some interpretations later. And then third, fieldwork is necessary to test the hypothesis or answer the research question. And this is where the bulk of anthropological research is done. Fieldwork is the first-hand systematic exploration of the variety of a human culture, or really of the variety of human cultures. Living with a group of people is like a living laboratory for cultural anthropologists. At its core, anthropology is a field science, meaning that we don't rely on experiments in labs or controlled settings, but rather we go to the places where cultural activity is happening and make our observations in a real-world setting. Cultural anthropologists who do this fieldwork are called ethnographers. Participant observation is the approach most commonly used in anthropology. This involves going to the culture we intend to study, living with the people, and participating fully in their activities and lifestyle at the same time we are observing it. It's definitely different than a laboratory situation. Anthropologists can hardly go out and start a war somewhere to see the effect of war on family life. However, they can certainly address the question in an area where a war happened to occur while they were in the field or where a war just happened. Just to give you the background, in the 1920s, it was Bronislaw Malinowski that started this trend in anthropological fieldwork. He saw the goal of the ethnographers grasping the native points of view, his relation to life relative to his vision of the world. He felt that this could only be accomplished through fieldwork, living among the people and observing their behavior firsthand and participating in their lives. The goal was to grasp the native point of view objectively and without bias. The writing up of field data is aimed at presenting as authentic and coherent a picture of the cultural system as possible. Both participation and observation are necessary in good fieldwork. But anthropology must be concerned with the accuracy of its data, too. So as a result, they have to rely to a great extent on informants as well as observation. Informants, or key cultural consultants, are people who have deep knowledge and are willing to pass this information on to the anthropologists. All anthropologists have a few key informants with whom they work in the field. These informants are essential for explaining cultural patterns and the cultural ideal that we'll talk about in a minute, and are useful in introducing the anthropologist to the community and helping them establish a wide range of social networks. Participation is also necessary in addition to these informants and observation because it's the best way to understand the difference between what people say they do, feel, or think and what kinds of actions they take. It's not that people deliberately lie, but when they're asked about some aspect of their culture, they often give the cultural ideal or what they're taught about their culture, not what actually happens. So from examples from our own culture, education, the ideal is that most people talk about how important an education is and how you must graduate. But the real culture is that most of the people in this country often don't graduate and don't plan on it. And those who do graduate from high school and want to attend a college can't afford it or have some other compelling reason why they can't go. So it's not accessible to everyone, even though it's supposedly super important. Let's talk about equality. The Declaration of Independence states that all people are created equal, but at the time it was written, only certain people could vote and slavery was legal. We are still struggling with equality in our country today. When we look at gender roles in marriage, the ideal culture is still that the woman is the housekeeper and takes care of the babies while the man works. But the real culture is that some men stay home with the children while their wife is the breadwinner. Sometimes both people work. Sometimes they're single parents. There are so many different roles now. Let's look at sex before marriage. The ideal culture is that no one has sex before marriage or children out of wedlock. But in real culture, teenagers having babies daily with their high school crushes. So there are large discrepancies between what we are taught and what we actually do. And this comparison highlights the discrepancy between attitudes and behaviors, people saying one thing but doing another. It's important to the study of culture because people will always give the cultural ideal but be doing something else. So this indicates that people don't always follow culturally programmed behavior. So participation forces the researcher to think about how to behave in a culturally appropriate manner and sharpens insight into the right way of behavior. Anthropologists, in addition to participating, should be recording all the information they are learning, from memory, from field notes, from journals. Description should be comprehensive in terms of details. Their personal observations, question, and notes should be separate facts from interpretations. So in addition to participation, an anthropologist must collect other data. But because anthropology tries to adhere to the scientific method, the method of data collection is tied to theory, and you should have already read through some of the theories. This means that the way we collect our data is related to the questions we hope our research will answer. So even though collecting a ton of data about participant observation is essential, the research question will guide the rest of the information that's gathered. So, participant observation is augmented by one or more methods, such as census taking, structured interviews, archival research, map making, genealogies, photography, life histories, local beliefs, and more. Once the task of collecting the data has been accomplished, an anthropologist must return to the research question and analyze the data. They have to focus on what does it all mean. In the early years of anthropology as a discipline, the aim of anthropological fieldwork was to provide a description of the total cultural pattern. So patterns of how people behave, variations in sex, age, and perceptions, meanings of their views and feelings, relationships of how traits are related in the cultural system, functions, how traits contribute to the economic, social, psychological adaptation. And even though today we'd like to have a description of the total cultural pattern, the goal primarily is to provide meaning through interpretation. There are two levels of cultural experience or meaning. The first are emic descriptions. These are the insider's point of view, how members think and feel about a behavior. What is their reality? Emic descriptions produce a view of the world that the native participants see as real. Functions or etic descriptions is the view from the outside looking in. So it asks, how does a behavior contribute to the adaptation of a group? How is it adaptive in meeting life challenges and contributions to the group continuation? It looks at types of functions. Are functions biological for health and fitness? Are they related to subsistence and economics? Are they social functions related to group cohesion, cooperation, social control? Are there psychological functions such as individual identity, purpose, stress management? Are there ecological functions such as climate and resources? Functions can be in different areas of culture than meanings. And today, to address function, the anthropologist often has a specific theoretical problem to focus on rather than simply to describe a culture in its totality. In today's changing world, this has become the dominant pattern. And when you read about the theories, you should have read about a variety of different theories. And today, anthropologists are much more eclectic in their application of theories. So they might not just pick one theory. They might pick several theories in order to explain culture. And no matter what, the goal is to explain culture from the insider's and the outsider's point of view. And finally, and we just briefly talked about this, anthropologists use a number of theories to explain behavior. And these are discussed a little bit in the chapters and a lot in the outside website I wanted you to look at. So really do look at those. And then finally, anthropologists have to publish. We don't do anthropology just for the sake of doing it. We do anthropology to get the information out there. Ethnography is writing about people. So we publish ethnographies, we publish journal articles, we publish short films. And you've got lots of short films to choose from in your book. So that's doing anthropology in a nutshell. And as always, email me if you have any questions.